The harsh desert sun blazed overhead as Nora Fletcher felt the rough hemp ropes bite into her wrists, the sound of men's laughter and crude remarks echoing in her ears like vultures circling prey. She stood on the makeshift wooden platform in the dusty mining town of Copper Creek, Arizona Territory, 1882. Her auburn hair falling in tangled waves around her dirt-streaked face as the auctioneer's voice boomed across the crowd of unshaven, liquor-soaked men who eyed her like wolves sizing up a lamb. Next up, gentlemen, this fine specimen of womanhood, young, strong, and spirited, suitable for cooking, cleaning, and whatever else you might fancy. The crowd roared with laughter and Nora felt her stomach twist with revulsion. The leering faces before her blurred through her tears as the auctioneer continued. Starting bid is $20. Who'll give me 20 for this fine piece? The bidding began, voices calling out amounts that made Nora's head spin. 25, 30, $40, each number representing a future more horrific than she could imagine. Just 3 weeks ago, she had been traveling west with her uncle after her parents' death, hoping for a new beginning. Then came the ambush. Apache raiders, her uncle had shouted, pushing her from the wagon before the arrows struck him dead. But it hadn't been Apache at all, just white men in disguise, bandits who took what they wanted and sold what would bring a profit, including her. $70. Called a burly, bearded miner whose eyes held nothing but cruelty? 80. Shouted another, his teeth stained yellow with tobacco. The auctioneer's eyes gleamed with greed as he pointed to the first man. I've got 70. Do I hear 85, $100? The voice that cut through the cacophony was deep, steady, and commanding. The crowd parted, and Nora saw him for the first time. Tall and broad-shouldered, he stood apart from the others, his stance relaxed but somehow radiating power. Unlike the dirty miners and drifters, he wore a clean, dark shirt under a leather vest, a well-worn hat shading eyes that held neither cruelty nor lust, but something else entirely: determination. Well now, the auctioneer drawled, looks like we have a serious bidder. I have 100 from Mr. Kincaid. Do I hear 110? The bearded miner spat in the dirt. 110, 150, the stranger countered without hesitation. A murmur ran through the crowd. The bearded miner glared at the stranger but stayed silent, going once, going twice. Sold to Mr. Kincaid for $150. Nora felt herself being shoved off the platform toward her buyer, her legs trembling so badly she nearly collapsed. Would this man be any better than the others? His eyes, an unusual shade of green flecked with gold, gave nothing away. The auctioneer thrust a piece of paper at him. Here's your bill of sale, Mr. Kincaid. The man called Kincaid took the paper, glanced at it, then deliberately tore it to shreds, letting the pieces flutter to the dusty ground. The crowd fell silent, watching. My name is Grant Kincaid, he said to Nora, his voice low enough that only she could hear. I'm the foreman at the Silverado Ranch. You'll sleep safe among men now, miss. I give you my word. He untied her bound wrists, his touch gentle but efficient, then draped his duster around her shoulders. The crowd began to disperse, disappointed at being denied the spectacle they'd hoped for. The bearded miner shouldered his way forward, alcohol fumes preceding him. Mighty generous of you, Kincaid, paying so much, planning to share with your men. Grant's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flashed in his eyes. Miss Fletcher isn't property. She's under my protection now. The lady has a name, does she? Awful friendly already. The miner took another step forward, hand drifting toward his gun. Before the situation could escalate further, a voice called out from the far end of the street. Grant, got the supplies loaded. We're set to head back. Nora turned to see a younger man with similar features to Grant, a brother perhaps sitting in the driver's seat of a loaded wagon. Perfect timing, Grant murmured. He placed a hand lightly on Nora's back, guiding her away from the miner without turning his back on the man. Let's go, Miss Fletcher. How do you know my name? Nora whispered, finding her voice for the first time. Your uncle's wagon had Fletcher Dry Goods painted on the side. Word reached us about the attack. I've been looking for survivors." His voice remained steady, but regret colored his words. "I'm sorry I didn't find you sooner." Nora felt tears threatening again but forced them back. "Why would you look for me? You don't know me." Grant helped her up onto the wagon bench beside his brother. "I knew your uncle, he supplied our ranch. A good man deserves better than to have his family sold like cattle." The younger man extended his hand. "Nathan Kincaid." "Sorry about the circumstances, Miss Fletcher." Nora took his hand hesitantly. "Thank you both." As they pulled away from Copper Creek, the vastness of the Arizona desert stretching before them, Nora clutched Grant's duster around her shoulders and stared straight ahead. She refused to look back at the town that had nearly become her prison, focusing instead on the unfamiliar road ahead. "It's about 4 hours to Silverado," Grant said, riding alongside the wagon on a powerful chestnut horse. "There's water in the canteen if you're thirsty." Nora nodded but made no move for the water. Her mind whirled with questions. Who was this man who had spent a small fortune to rescue her, and what did he truly want in return, Miss Fletcher? Grant said, seeming to read her thoughts. "I understand your caution. But you have my word you'll be safe at Silverado. Mrs. Abernathy, our housekeeper, will see to your needs. When you're ready, we'll arrange transport to your family in the east if that's what you wish." "I have no family left," Nora said, her voice hollow. "My parents died of fever last winter. Uncle Thomas was taking me to San Francisco. He had a friend there who owns a bookshop." Grant nodded, digesting this information. "Then you'll stay at Silverado until you decide what you want to do next. No obligations." The landscape changed as they traveled, desert giving way to grassland dotted with mesquite and pinyon pines. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows as they crested a hill, and Nora caught her first glimpse of Silverado Ranch spread out below a large main house, bunkhouse, barn, and corrals, all nestled in a verdant valley fed by a creek that glinted silver in the fading light. "It's beautiful," she whispered, surprising herself. "It's home," Grant replied simply, a hint of pride in his voice. As they approached, ranch hands paused in their work to look curiously at the wagon and its unexpected passenger. Nora felt their eyes on her and shrank deeper into Grant's duster. Nathan guided the wagon to the main house, a 2-story structure built of timber and stone. Before they had fully stopped, the front door opened and an older woman with silver-streaked dark hair hurried down the steps. "Thank the Lord," she exclaimed. "When I heard about Thomas Fletcher, I feared the worst." "Mrs. Abernathy," Grant said, dismounting. "This is Nora Fletcher, Thomas's niece. She's had a difficult time. She'll be staying with us." The woman's kind eyes took in Nora's bedraggled appearance without judgment. "Of course she will." "Come inside, dear. Let's get you cleaned up and fed." Nora hesitated, looking at Grant. "Go on," he encouraged. "Mrs. Abernathy makes the best apple pie west of the Mississippi. I'll see to your things." "I don't have any things," Nora said quietly. Something like anger flashed in Grant's eyes, quickly controlled. "We'll take care of that. Go rest now." Mrs. Abernathy led Nora inside, through a comfortably furnished sitting room and up a staircase to a bedroom at the end of a hallway. "This will be your room for as long as you need it," the housekeeper said, opening a wardrobe. "I'll find you some clothes. They may need taking in. They belong to Mrs. Kincaid, God rest her soul. She was a bit taller than you." "Mrs. Kincaid?" Nora asked, curiosity momentarily overcoming her exhaustion. "Grant and Nathan's mother. She passed 3 years ago, pneumonia. Their father followed a year later, his heart, though some say it was grief." Mrs. Abernathy poured water from a pitcher into a basin. "The bathhouse is out back, but for tonight, this will help you feel human again. I'll bring up some supper when you're ready." Alone in the room, Nora slowly removed Grant's duster, hanging it carefully over a chair. She caught her reflection in the mirror above the dresser and barely recognized herself, hair tangled, face smudged with dirt and tears, eyes haunted. For the first time since the ambush, she allowed herself to truly weep, silent tears streaming down her face as she mourned her uncle, and the future that had been stolen from her. Later, washed and dressed in a borrowed nightgown and robe, Nora sat cross-legged on the bed, eating stew and biscuits from the tray Mrs. Abernathy had brought. She had expected to have no appetite, but found herself ravenous after days of near starvation. A gentle knock at the door made her start. "Miss Fletcher, it's Grant Kincaid. May I speak with you a moment?" Nora pulled the robe tighter around herself. "Yes, come in." Grant entered, hat in hand, his tall frame filling the doorway. He had changed into a clean shirt and his hair was damp as if he too had washed up. In the soft lamplight, Nora realized he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting into the sun and perhaps of laughter. "I wanted to make sure you have everything you need," he said, keeping a respectful distance. "Yes, thank you." "Everyone has been very kind," Grant nodded, seeming oddly hesitant for a man who had faced down armed miners without blinking. "Miss Fletcher, I want you to know that what happened in Copper Creek, it's not how things are supposed to be, not even out here. Those men, they're the worst of humanity." "Why did you do it?" Nora asked suddenly. "Pay so much to free a stranger," Grant's expression softened. "Your uncle saved my life once. There was a flash flood 3 years back. He pulled me from the creek when my horse went down. Never asked for anything in return, just said to pass it on someday." He paused. "I'm only sorry I couldn't save him too." Nora felt a fresh wave of grief, but also something else, gratitude that her uncle had been the kind of man who inspired such loyalty. "Thank you for telling me that." "Get some rest, Miss Fletcher. Tomorrow will be easier." He turned to leave, then hesitated. "One more thing, if anyone ever makes you uncomfortable here, you come straight to me. Silverado has rules and respecting women is first among them." After he left, Nora blew out the lamp and lay back on the softest bed she'd felt in weeks. Outside, she could hear the distant sounds of cattle lowing and men's voices drifting from the bunkhouse. Yet for the first time since the ambush, she didn't feel afraid of those voices. Grant Kincaid had promised her safety among men, and somehow, despite everything, she believed him. The following days established a routine. Mrs. Abernathy took Nora under her wing, showing her around the ranch house, introducing her to the cook, Mr. Chen, a Chinese man who had worked for the Kincaids for 15 years, and explaining the rhythm of ranch life. Nora met the various ranch hands, most of them respectful if curious about her presence, a few openly friendly. She saw little of Grant, who left at dawn each day with the men and returned after dark, the demands of the ranch keeping him constantly busy. When their paths did cross, he was unfailingly polite but maintained a certain distance that Nora couldn't help but notice and, surprisingly, regret. By the end of her first week, restlessness had set in. One morning after breakfast, Nora approached Mrs. Abernathy in the kitchen. "I'd like to make myself useful," she said firmly. "I can't keep accepting your hospitality without contributing something." Mrs. Abernathy looked up from the bread dough she was kneading. "No one expects you to work for your keep, dear. I know that, but I need purpose." Nora twisted her hands in the fabric of her borrowed skirt. "I've never been idle." The older woman studied her thoughtfully, then nodded. "What can you do?" "I kept my father's accounts for his law practice. I'm good with numbers." "And I helped my mother with her charity work correspondence, organizing events." "Well now," Mrs. Abernathy smiled. "Grant's been complaining about the state of the ranch accounts for months. His father kept meticulous records, but since his passing..." She gestured toward a door off the kitchen. "The office is through there. Fair warning, it's a proper mess." The office was indeed a disaster, papers stacked haphazardly on every surface, ledgers with pages falling out, invoices stuffed into drawers. Nora surveyed it with growing determination. Here was a challenge she could tackle, a way to repay some small portion of the kindness she'd been shown. She was deeply absorbed in sorting papers when the office door opened in the late afternoon. Grant stopped short in the doorway, surprise evident on his face. "Miss Fletcher." "What are you doing in here?" Nora straightened up from where she'd been kneeling beside an open drawer. Bringing order to chaos, Mr. Kincaid. Your filing system leaves much to be desired. For a moment, he looked as if he might be angry, then his expression shifted and the corner of his mouth quirked up. Filing system implies there was a system to begin with. Precisely my point. Nora gestured to the neat stack she'd created. I've sorted everything by type: expenses, income, payroll, supplies, correspondence. Tomorrow I'll start entering everything into proper ledgers. Grant moved further into the room, looking at her work with growing appreciation. Mrs. Abernathy put you up to this, I volunteered. I needed something to do, he nodded, then surprised her by rolling up his sleeves. Show me what you've done so far. For the next hour they worked side by side, Nora explaining her organizational approach while Grant provided context for various documents. The tension that had existed between them began to dissolve as they focused on the shared task. You're good at this, Grant said as the sun began to set, casting the office in golden light. Where did you learn? My father believed women should be educated the same as men. He taught me law, accounting, philosophy. Nora's voice trailed off as memories threatened to overwhelm her. Grant seemed to sense her shift in mood. He sounds like a wise man. My father was similar, insisted my mother have an equal say in ranch decisions. It scandalized some of the neighboring ranchers. Is that unusual around here? More common than you might think, at least on the working ranches. Out here, everyone contributes or no one survives. He leaned back against the desk. My mother could outride most men and still quote Shakespeare at dinner. Nora smiled at the image. I'd have liked to meet her. She'd have liked you, Grant said with such certainty that Nora felt a flush of warmth. He cleared his throat and gestured to the window. It's getting dark. We should finish for today. As they walked to the main house, the first stars appearing overhead, Nora felt more at ease with Grant than she had since arriving. Mr. Kincaid, she ventured, would it be possible? That is, I was wondering if I might see more of the ranch sometime. He looked down at her, surprise evident in his expression. You want a tour? If it wouldn't be too much trouble, I've never been on a cattle ranch before. No trouble at all. Sunday is quieter. I could show you around after church if you'd like. I'd like that very much. Sunday dawned clear and bright. Nora wore a dress that Mrs. Abernathy had altered for her, a simple blue cotton that complemented her auburn hair, which she'd pinned up in a modest style. The small church in the nearby town of Silverado Falls was filled with ranchers, townspeople, and their families, all of whom regarded Nora with undisguised curiosity. Grant introduced her simply as Miss Fletcher, a family friend staying at the ranch, which seemed to satisfy most questioners. After the service, they declined invitations to Sunday dinner in town, Grant explaining that he'd promised Nora a tour of Silverado. You're causing quite a stir, he commented as they rode back in the wagon, Nathan driving while the two of them sat in back. I noticed, Nora said dryly. Mrs. Wilkinson from the general store asked if I was your mail-order bride. Nathan snorted with laughter while Grant looked mortified. I apologize for the town's lack of discretion. No need. Small towns are the same everywhere. Curiosity is the main form of entertainment. Nora smiled at his discomfort. I simply told her the truth that you rescued me from a difficult situation and offered hospitality while I decide my next steps. And have you, Grant asked quietly, decided your next steps? Nora looked out at the landscape rolling by, considering her answer carefully. Not yet, but I'm starting to believe there might be a future worth planning for again. Back at the ranch, Grant saddled 2 horses, his own chestnut gelding and a gentle bay mare for Nora. Can you ride? He asked, realizing he'd never inquired. Since I was 6, Nora assured him, gathering her skirts to mount with practiced ease. Though not in a while and never Western style. Grant adjusted her stirrups. You'll get used to it, just relax and let the horse do the work. They rode at a leisurely pace, Grant pointing out the boundaries of Silverado's 10,000 acres, explaining the operation of the ranch, the breeding program he'd initiated, the rotation of grazing lands to preserve the grass. the new well system he was installing to ensure water during drought years. Nora listened with growing admiration. It was clear that Grant wasn't just working the land, he was nurturing it, planning for generations beyond himself. They stopped at the highest point of the property, a ridge overlooking the entire valley, dismounting to rest the horses. "It's magnificent," Nora said, taking in the panoramic view. "You must be very proud of what you've built here." "My father built it," Grant corrected, but with pride rather than bitterness. "I'm just trying to make sure it thrives for the next generation. Your children." "My brothers, most likely. I'm not sure I'll ever marry." Something in his tone suggested an old wound, and Nora wondered about its cause. "The right woman hasn't come along?" she asked carefully. Grant's gaze remained fixed on the distant horizon. "She did, Caroline Harper. We were engaged 3 years ago." "What happened?" She decided ranch life wasn't for her after all. Too isolated, too hard. She left for San Francisco. He shrugged, the casual gesture at odds with the pain in his voice. "She wasn't wrong. It is hard, especially for women." Nora thought of Mrs. Abernathy working from dawn until dusk without complaint, and of Grant's description of his mother. Some women are stronger than others. Grant turned to look at her then, really look at her, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. "Yes," he agreed softly, "some are." The moment stretched between them, filled with something unspoken. Nora felt her heart quicken as Grant took a step toward her, then stopped as shouts drifted up from the valley below. "Grant!" Nathan's voice, urgent even at a distance. "Riders coming in fast." Grant's expression shifted instantly from contemplative to alert. "We need to get back. Stay close to me." They rode down the ridge at a pace that would have terrified Nora a week earlier, but now merely sent adrenaline coursing through her. As they approached the main house, she saw several men on horseback in the yard, ranch hands gathered in a wary semicircle around them. Nora recognized one of the mounted men with a jolt of fear, the bearded miner who had bid against Grant at the auction. "Trouble," Grant muttered, positioning his horse so that Nora was partially shielded behind him as they rode into the yard. "Kincaid," the miner called, a malicious grin splitting his beard. "Thought I'd come meet this new woman of yours proper-like, Daniels." Grant's voice was cold as he dismounted, helping Nora down and keeping himself between her and the visitors. "You're trespassing. Free country, ain't it? Just being neighborly." Daniels swayed slightly in his saddle, clearly drunk despite the early hour. His gaze fixed on Nora, making her skin crawl. "Miss, you should know what kind of man bought you. Kincaid here thinks he's better than the rest of us hard-working folk, too good to drink or whore with the men in town." "That's enough," Grant's voice was low with warning. "State your business or leave. Business is her." Daniels pointed at Nora. "Word is you paid $150 for damaged goods. I'm offering $200. Fair deal." Nora felt sick, but before she could react, Grant had moved with surprising speed. In one fluid motion, he grabbed Daniels's shirt front and yanked him from the saddle, throwing him to the ground. The miner's companions reached for their weapons, but froze as Silverado's ranch hands drew first. "Miss Fletcher is not for sale," Grant said, his boot pressing lightly on Daniels's chest. "She is a guest in my home under my protection. Anyone who disrespects her answers to me." He increased the pressure slightly. "Is that clear, Daniels?" The miner glared up at him with hatred. "Clear as day, Kincaid, but this ain't over." Grant removed his foot and stepped back. "Yes, it is. Now get off my land before I forget my Christian charity." Daniels scrambled to his feet, his companions helping him back onto his horse. "You've made an enemy today," he spat. "I'll add you to the list." Grant stood impassive until the riders disappeared down the road, then turned to Nora. His expression softened immediately upon seeing her pale face. "Are you all right?" Nora nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The encounter had brought back every horror of the auction block, every moment of degradation and fear. But it had also shown her something else, the fierce protectiveness of the man standing before her, the absolute certainty in his voice when he defended her honor. "Come inside," Grant said gently, placing a hand at the small of her back. Mrs. Abernathy will have dinner ready soon. The evening passed quietly, the household subdued after the confrontation. After dinner, Nora retreated to the front porch, needing fresh air and solitude to process the day's events. She sat on the steps, watching as the sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Mind some company," Grant's voice came from behind her. Nora shifted over to make room. "Not at all." He sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cooling evening air. For several minutes they sat in companionable silence, watching the light fade from the sky. "I'm sorry about today," Grant finally said. "Daniels and his kind. They're relics of a dying age. The West is changing." "Not fast enough," Nora murmured. "No," he agreed, "but it is changing. More families settling, more law, more civilization." He glanced at her. "What Daniels said about you being damaged goods, you know that's not true, right?" Nora looked down at her hands. "Isn't it? In the eyes of society, a woman alone with no family, no fortune, no reputation to speak of. What am I if not damaged?" "You're a survivor," Grant said firmly. "And society's eyes aren't the only ones that matter." She looked up at him then, finding his gaze intent upon her face. "Whose eyes do matter, Mr. Kincaid? The people who care about you." He held her gaze a moment longer, then looked away. "Your own, most of all." Nora felt something shift inside her at his words, a small but significant realignment of her understanding of herself and her place in the world. Not a victim, but a survivor. Not property, but a person of worth. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." "You don't need to thank me for basic human decency, Miss Fletcher." "Nora," she corrected. "After today, I think you've earned the right to call me Nora." A slow smile spread across his face. "Then you should call me Grant." "Grant," she repeated, testing the name on her tongue. It suited him solid, strong, unyielding. The weeks that followed settled into a comfortable rhythm. Nora continued organizing the ranch accounts, discovering a genuine talent for business management. She started riding out with Grant more frequently, learning about cattle ranching firsthand. The more she learned about Silverado, the more she admired what the Kincaids had built, not just a profitable business, but a community where every person, regardless of background, was treated with respect and fairness. Mr. Chen, the cook, told her how Grant had defended him against bigots in town. Mrs. Abernathy shared stories of how the Kincaids had helped her after her husband died, giving her not just employment but dignity and purpose. Even the youngest ranch hand, a boy of barely 18 named Joey, spoke of how Grant had taken him in when his own father had thrown him out for a youthful mistake. One evening in late October, nearly 2 months after her arrival, Nora found Grant in the office long after the others had gone to bed. He sat at the desk, head bent over a letter, expression troubled in the lamplight. "Bad news?" she asked from the doorway. He looked up, tension momentarily easing from his features at the sight of her. "Not exactly. The bank in Tucson is questioning some of our expenses. Nothing we can't explain, but it's another delay on the loan for the new irrigation system." Nora crossed to the desk and held out her hand. "May I?" Grant passed her the letter. She read it quickly, frowning at the banker's convoluted language. "This is ridiculous. We've documented everything perfectly." He raised an eyebrow at her use of "we," but didn't comment on it. "Some bankers get nervous lending to ranchers. Cattle prices are volatile." "Then we'll show them Silverado is different." Nora sat down across from him, pulling paper and pen toward herself. "We'll prepare a complete financial projection for the next 3 years, demonstrating how the irrigation system will actually increase profitability by reducing cattle loss during dry years." Grant watched her with a mixture of amusement and admiration. "It's nearly midnight." "Is there somewhere else you need to be?" he laughed, the sound warming the room. "Nowhere at all." They worked until the small hours, side by side, their shoulders occasionally brushing as they pored over figures and drafted the response. When they finally finished, the eastern sky was beginning to lighten. "We make a good team," Grant said softly, looking at Nora with an expression that made her breath catch. "We do," she agreed, suddenly very aware of their proximity in the quiet house. Grant reached out, hesitated, then gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Nora, a sound from the kitchen interrupted whatever he had been about to say. Mrs. Abernathy, up early to start breakfast, Grant pulled back, clearing his throat. "You should get some rest." "I'll take this letter into town today." Nora nodded, disappointed yet somehow relieved at the interruption. What was happening between them felt significant, worth savoring rather than rushing. Later that day, after snatching a few hours of sleep, Nora found herself in the garden with Mrs. Abernathy, helping to harvest the last of the fall vegetables before the first frost. "You and Mr. Grant were up late," the housekeeper remarked, her tone carefully neutral, "working on the bank letter." Nora focused on the carrots she was pulling, avoiding the older woman's knowing gaze. "Been doing a lot of working together lately." Nora felt her cheeks warm. "Mrs. Abernathy, it's not obvious that you two have feelings for each other." The housekeeper straightened, pressing a hand to her lower back. "Child, I've known Grant Kincaid since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you, not even Caroline." Nora's hands stilled in the dirt. "He was engaged before, and heartbroken after, closed himself off for years." Mrs. Abernathy's expression softened. "Until you arrived. I didn't come here looking for that, of course not. But life has a way of giving us what we need, not what we're looking for." The older woman patted Nora's shoulder. "Just be patient with him. Grant takes his responsibilities seriously, sometimes too seriously. He'll want to be sure of his feelings and yours before he speaks." As fall deepened toward winter, the dynamic between Nora and Grant continued to evolve. Small touches lingered longer. Conversations extended into the night, and shared glances carried unspoken meaning. Yet neither took the final step to acknowledge what was growing between them. November brought the first significant snowfall, blanketing Silverado in white and limiting ranch activities. One evening, confined indoors by the weather, Nathan suggested a game of cards after dinner. Soon, the dining table was surrounded by the Kincaid brothers, Nora, Mrs. Abernathy, and Mr. Chen. "5-card draw," Nathan declared, shuffling the deck with practiced hands. "Nothing wild, penny ante." As the evening progressed, the conversation flowed easily from ranch matters to town gossip to memories of winters past. Nora found herself watching Grant the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed at his brother's jokes, the gentle teasing he directed at Mrs. Abernathy, the respectful way he included Mr. Chen in every discussion. "Your deal, Nora," Grant said, interrupting her thoughts as he passed her the deck. Their fingers brushed, and Nora felt the now familiar jolt of awareness. She fumbled the cards, sending them scattering across the table. "I'm so sorry," she exclaimed, mortified. "No harm done," Grant said, helping her gather the cards. Their hands met again over the Queen of Hearts, and this time his fingers curled briefly around hers before releasing them. Mrs. Abernathy and Mr. Chen exchanged knowing glances. "I think I'll turn in," the housekeeper announced. "These old bones need rest." "I too must sleep," Mr. Chen agreed, rising. "Breakfast comes early." Nathan yawned dramatically. "Think I'll follow suit. Good night, all." Within minutes, Nora and Grant found themselves alone, the abrupt departures of the others so obviously coordinated that Nora had to stifle a laugh. "Subtle, aren't they?" Grant said with a rueful smile, "about as subtle as a stampede." Nora stacked the cards neatly, unable to meet his eyes. Grant rose and moved to the fireplace, adding another log to the flames. The warm light danced across his features, highlighting the strong line of his jaw, the thoughtful set of his mouth. When he turned back to her, his expression was serious. "Nora, there's something I need to ask you," her heart stuttered. "Yes." "It's been over 3 months since you came to Silverado. You've never mentioned leaving again." "No, I haven't." Grant took a step toward her. "Why is that?" Nora stood, gathering her courage. "Perhaps because I've found something here I wasn't expecting." Another step. And what's that? A place where I belong. She looked up at him, no longer hiding the emotion in her eyes. People I care about. Grant closed the remaining distance between them, taking her hands in his. People or one person in particular? You know the answer to that, Nora whispered. His hands tightened on hers. I need to hear you say it. You, Grant, I've fallen in love with you. The admission hung in the air between them, both terrifying and liberating. For a heartbeat, Grant remained perfectly still, then he released her hands only to cup her face gently between his palms. I've been falling in love with you since the moment you organized my chaotic office, he said, his voice rough with emotion. But I needed to be sure you weren't just grateful or feeling obligated because of how we met. I passed gratitude months ago, Nora assured him, and obligation never entered into it. Grant's thumbs traced the line of her cheekbones, his touch reverent. May I kiss you, Nora Fletcher? In answer, she rose on tiptoe, closing the last inches between them. Their lips met in a kiss that began tentatively but quickly deepened as months of restrained longing found release. Grant's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer, while Nora's hands found their way to his shoulders, feeling the solid strength of him beneath her fingertips. When they finally parted, both breathing unevenly, Grant rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that since that day on the ridge, he confessed. Why did you wait so long? Because you deserve a proper courtship, not just a man who couldn't control his feelings. He brushed his lips against her temple. And because I wanted you to be absolutely certain of your own heart. I am certain, Nora assured him, more certain than I've ever been of anything. The door to the dining room opened suddenly, and they stepped apart as Nathan poked his head in. Sorry to interrupt, but we've got trouble. Ryder just came in from town. There's a fire at the Wilkinson store. Grant was immediately alert. How bad? Bad enough. They're calling for all able-bodied men to help. Nathan looked apologetic. I'd go alone, but with the snow. No, we'll both go. Get the wagon ready. Grant turned to Nora, regret in his eyes. I have to go, she urged. People need help. He kissed her quickly, a promise in the gesture. We'll continue this conversation when I return. Nora watched from the porch as the wagon disappeared into the snowy night, Mrs. Abernathy standing beside her with a lantern held high to guide them down the drive. They'll be back by morning, the housekeeper assured her, though concern edged her voice. But morning came with no sign of the Kincaid brothers, and by midday, worry had settled over Silverado like a shroud. Nora paced the front windows, watching the road, starting at every sound. When hoofbeats finally approached in the early afternoon, she rushed outside without a coat, heedless of the cold. It wasn't Grant or Nathan, but Joey, the young ranch hand, his face grim as he dismounted. What is it? Nora demanded. Where are they? Fire's out, Miss Fletcher. But there's been trouble. Joey twisted his hat in his hands. Daniels and his men were in town drunk, started accusing the Wilkinsons of cheating them, saying they set the fire themselves for insurance money. Things got ugly. Grant and Nathan. They stepped in when Daniels pulled a gun on old man Wilkinson. There was a fight. Joey's eyes dropped. Mr. Grant got shot. Nora felt the world tilt. Is he? Alive, but hurt bad. Doctors with him at the Wilkinsons. Mr. Nathan sent me to fetch you, Mrs. Abernathy, who had followed Nora outside, took charge immediately. Hitch up the buggy, Joey. I'll pack supplies. The journey into town was the longest of Nora's life. The snow had hardened overnight, making travel possible but slow. By the time they reached Silverado Falls, the winter sun was already setting, casting long shadows across the main street. The aftermath of the fire was evident. The charred remains of the general store stood in stark contrast to the white snow. People moved purposefully through the streets, carrying salvaged goods and clearing debris. Several nodded respectfully to Nora as she passed, news of her relationship with Grant having apparently spread. The Wilkinsons lived above their store, but with that space now uninhabitable, the doctor had moved Grant to his own home at the end of the street. Nathan met Nora at the door, his face haggard with exhaustion and worry. "How is he?" Nora asked, her voice barely above a whisper, holding his own. "Bullet went through his shoulder, missed anything vital, but he's lost a lot of blood." Nathan took her cloak. "He's been asking for you." The doctor, a gray-haired man with kind eyes, was just emerging from a bedroom as Nora entered. "Miss Fletcher, I'm Dr. Holloway." "Your fiancé is a very lucky man. He's not my—" Nora began, then stopped. "May I see him, briefly? He needs rest, but seeing you might ease his mind." Grant lay still against white sheets, his skin nearly as pale. A bandage encircled his left shoulder, and his chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. Nora approached the bed on trembling legs, taking his right hand gently in hers. "Grant, it's Nora. I'm here." His eyes fluttered open, focusing on her face with effort. "Nora." His voice was weak but clear. "You came." "Of course I came, you foolish man." Tears threatened, but she blinked them back. "What were you thinking, confronting armed men?" A ghost of his usual smile touched his lips. "Thinking of protecting innocent people. It's what we do at Silverado, remember?" Nora raised his hand to her lips, pressing a kiss to his knuckles. "And who protects you?" "I have you for that now, don't I?" His eyes drifted closed, exhaustion claiming him. Dr. Holloway ushered Nora from the room, assuring her that sleep was the best medicine. Nathan filled her in on the details, how Daniels had become enraged when the townspeople rallied around the Wilkinsons, how he'd drawn his gun in desperation, and how Grant had moved to disarm him just as the weapon discharged. "Daniels is in jail now," Nathan concluded. "Sheriff's holding him for attempted murder. Says he'll likely hang given his reputation and the witnesses. And the Wilkinsons, their store. Building's lost, but the townspeople are already talking about rebuilding. The Wilkinsons are staying with the pastor for now." Nora nodded, her mind working despite her emotional exhaustion. "The ranch accounts we have funds set aside for emergencies. We could advance the Wilkinsons enough to restart their business." Nathan studied her with newfound respect. "We could. It's what my father would have done." He smiled slightly. "We, is it?" Nora flushed. "I didn't mean to presume. No, it's good." Nathan squeezed her shoulder. "Grant's been happier these past months than I've seen him in years. Whatever's between you two, I'm all for it." For the next 3 days, Nora barely left Grant's side, sleeping in a chair by his bed, helping change his bandages, and coaxing him to eat the broths Mrs. Abernathy prepared. His color gradually improved, and by the 4th day he was sitting up, insisting he felt well enough to return to Silverado. "Not until I say so," Dr. Holloway declared firmly. Another day of rest, at least. When they were alone again, Grant reached for Nora's hand. "You look exhausted." "Says the man who got shot." She smoothed his hair back from his forehead. "How do you really feel?" "Like I've been kicked by a mule." His expression sobered. "Nora, seeing you here caring for me like this, it's made me realize something." "What's that?" "Life's too short and too unpredictable to waste time." He tightened his grip on her hand. "I love you. I want to spend whatever years I have left with you by my side. Will you marry me?" The simplicity of his proposal, devoid of flowery language or grand gestures, struck Nora as perfectly fitting for the man. Grant was direct, honest, and true. "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." His smile lit up his entire face. "I don't have a ring yet." "I don't need one. You're getting one anyway." He pulled her closer until she perched on the edge of the bed. "When we get back to Silverado, I'll do this properly, down on one knee and everything." Nora laughed, joy bubbling up through the fatigue and worry of the past days. "I'll pretend to be surprised." Grant's recovery progressed steadily, and within a week, Dr. Holloway pronounced him well enough to travel home, though with strict instructions to avoid strenuous activity for at least another 2 weeks. The return to Silverado felt like a homecoming to Nora in a way she had never experienced before, not just a return to a place, but to her future. News of their engagement spread quickly through the ranch and surrounding area. Mrs. Abernathy wept happy tears. Mr. Chen prepared a celebratory feast, and Nathan presented Nora with a small wooden box containing their mother's sapphire ring. She would have wanted you to have it, he told her. You have her spirit strong, kind, and not afraid to stand up to stubborn Kincaid men. True to his word, once his strength returned, Grant formally proposed again, kneeling before Nora in the garden where spring's first shoots were beginning to appear through melting snow. He placed the sapphire ring on her finger with hands that trembled slightly, a vulnerability that touched Nora deeply. They were married on the first day of May, 1883, in the same small church where they had sat side by side months earlier. The entire town turned out for the ceremony, along with every hand from Silverado and ranchers from miles around. The Wilkinsons, now installed in their rebuilt store, presented them with a fine set of china as a wedding gift. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Grant kissed Nora with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. "From this day forward," he whispered against her lips, "you'll always be safe, not just among men but with this man who loves you more than life itself." The celebration lasted well into the night, with dancing and feasting under stars that seemed to shine especially bright for the occasion. As darkness fell, Grant and Nora slipped away from the festivities, riding to the ridge where they had first begun to acknowledge their feelings for each other. "Happy?" Grant asked, drawing her into his arms as they looked out over Silverado, their home, spread out below them. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Nora answered truthfully. "When I was on that auction block, I thought my life was over. I couldn't imagine a future worth living. And now I can't imagine a future more perfect than the one we're building together." She rested her head against his chest, hearing the steady beat of his heart. "You saved me that day, Grant Kincaid." "No," he corrected gently, lifting her chin to meet her gaze. "You saved yourself, Nora. All I did was offer you a safe place to do it." In the years that followed, Silverado flourished under their joint stewardship. Nora's business acumen complemented Grant's practical ranching knowledge, creating one of the most successful operations in the territory. They welcomed 2 children, a son, Thomas, named after Nora's uncle, and a daughter, Eleanor, who inherited her mother's auburn hair and her father's determined spirit. The auction block in Copper Creek was torn down the same year Thomas was born, replaced by a proper courthouse where justice, not human lives, was dispensed. Nora sometimes thought about that day when she stood trembling before a crowd of hostile men, and marveled at how far she had come from a woman with no future to one whose days were filled with purpose, love, and the security of knowing she was valued not for what she could provide, but simply for who she was. On their 10th anniversary, Grant presented Nora with a deed half-ownership of Silverado officially registered in her name. "It's always been as much yours as mine," he told her. "Now the law recognizes what we've known all along." "That we're partners in every sense," Nora finished for him, her heart full. "Partners, lovers, friends." Grant drew her close. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't been in Copper Creek that day?" "Sometimes," Nora admitted. "But then, I remember something my father used to say, that life has a way of bringing together souls that belong to each other, no matter what obstacles stand in their way." Grant smiled, the lines at the corners of his eyes deepening lines earned through years of squinting into the sun and, more importantly, of laughter and joy. "Your father was a wise man. He would have liked you," Nora said with certainty. "And I would have asked him properly for your hand," Grant teased. "He would have given his blessing." Nora traced the scar on Grant's shoulder, a permanent reminder of how close she had come to losing him before their life together had truly begun. "Anyone who saw how you look at me would know you'd treasure me always." "Always," Grant agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss as the sunset painted Silverado in gold, a fitting backdrop to a love story that had begun in darkness but found its way, against all odds, into enduring light.